Kellogg's Pep, the super delicious cereal, presents the adventures of Superman.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman.
Welcome to this special Superman episode of Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. With the release of the new Superman movie, the first one starring the Jewish actor in the titular role, we thought it would be fun to bring on an expert in the subject of Superman's Jewishness. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios.
We're excited to talk to Roy Schwartz, a comic book historian, former CNN regular contributor, board member of the American Jewish Historical Society, and author of Is Superman Circumcised? The Complete Jewish History of the World's Greatest Hero. Roy, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Roy, is Superman circumcised?
Oh, we're going right to it, huh? The book was published in late 2021 and is the product of, believe it or not, 6.5 years of research, globe-spanning research, and even received a back-to-back 2-year fellowship from the New York Public Library. I was a writer in residence because even though it's a fun book and even though the subject matter is comics, it's a history book. And I wrote it to be fun to read, something you can crack open on the beach and actually, enjoy reading. But it does end with 41 pages of endnotes and bibliography. So it is a serious historical work, just fun. And those are not mutually exclusive. The book, Is Superman Circumcised, is also the winner of the 2021 Diagram Prize for Oddest Book Title in the World, which I am, as you can tell, way too proud of. To your question whether or not Superman actually is circumcised, you'd have to ask Lois Lane. But I have gotten asked this so many times, along with, every time I do a talk at a shul or JCC, the old folk take me aside and tell me all their penis jokes. So I should write a book about that next. But I get asked this so many times that I have had to come up with an answer, and here's my answer. If you know the mythology, he was born on planet Krypton under the name Kal-El, and his father was Jor-El, so he was circumcised by Moy-El.
So could you connect the Jewish dots for us in terms of the Jewish backstory or subtext anyway, of Superman?
Superheroes, beginning with Superman, he's the archetype, the text, right? Superheroes are a Jewish invention. The comic book medium is a Jewish invention, and the superhero genre, because Superman, is a Jewish invention. Superman was created in 1933, 1934, depending on what version of the evolution you put your finger down and say, this is the Superman we know, by two teenagers from Cleveland, Ohio, named Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. One was the son of immigrants, and one was an immigrant. They come from Eastern Europe, and these were alien transplants in Cleveland, in Ohio, the Midwest. And they were acutely aware of their otherness. This was the Great Depression, rise of Nazism overseas, rise of anti-Semitism in America, which was significantly more severe than what collective memory is comfortable remembering. And they really created their Superman in reaction to that. And they had many inspirations. Superman is very much a patchwork, as original as he was, really is a patchwork character. But among their inspirations are Jewish inspirations. Siegel acknowledged in a memoir he wrote that never got published that he was heavily inspired by Samson. That's the biblical judge who had super strength as well as super speed, fought in the name of truth and justice. Superman is actually compared to Samson many times in the early comics. And the cover of Superman #4 is even a deliberate homage to Samson. You see him toppling pillars of a building as crooks scurry around. Siegel was also inspired by the Golem of Prague, particularly a 1920 German movie called Der Golem. in creating this indestructible, indefatigable champion of the oppressed. So that Jewish DNA is there. Then they call their character Kal-El. And there have been many interpretations of what that means, but I'll simplify to the very, the basic one is that El in Hebrew is God. And Kal-El has this suffix, this theophoric suffix of all the angels and prophets in the Bible. Gavriel, Daniel, Israel, Kal-El. Then we look at the origin story, which is the clearest example, though Siegel never acknowledged that this was deliberate. What's the origin story of Superman? To save the baby from the impending doom of his people, his parents put him in a small ark. They sent him adrift on unknown fate in an act of desperation. He's found by people not his own, renamed, raised as a stranger in a strange land. In adulthood, he reclaims his heritage and becomes this great miracle-working savior, right? That's the origin story of Moses. 1-to-1, same beats. And there's a lot more to it. I'm giving you the minimalistic version. The book goes into much more detail, gives many more examples. And that's all Superman. But Superman is half the equation because the other half is Clark Kent. And Clark Kent is mostly an autobiographical character. Siegel and Schuster were both bespectacled, nebbishy, klutzy, awkward, socially unpopular, but cerebral, wisecracking. One was writerly, one was artistic. And they also kind of begrudgingly acknowledged that they were sort of embodiments of the Jewish stereotypes, especially at the time. And Clark Kent was an exaggeration of that. So Clark Kent was the reality while Superman was the wish fulfillment, right? So Superman, his costume is made from the fabrics his mother wrapped him in, which he placed him in the rocket ship. That's his ethnic garb. That's his talit. And at any given moment, Superman can decide, I'm Clark Kent, I'm hidden, or I open my shirt and I transform into Superman and then I'm revealed. So he can go back at whim, both in his personal identity, but also racial, human or Kryptonian. So he's basically the ultimate assimilation/assertion fantasy. He's the ultimate Jewish metaphor.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the Samson connection always appealed to me because, like Superman deriving his power from the sun, the early pre-biblical versions of Samson, the best that we can, piece together from a biblical scholarship archaeology perspective, is that he began as a sun god also. And a lot of what Samson does as a character in the biblical narrative, in terms of his hair sort of representing the rays of the sun, he burns off shackles just by clenching his fist. He has the power of the sun in a way that's so similar to Superman. I think, even if the young teenagers weren't aware of that, subtext in the Samson stuff, it's kind of a wonderful coincidence that they're connected in that way.
I discussed this in my book in a way that kind of strangely was not discussed in previous works. They just overlooked it. All scholarship is scaffolded. Every discovery is built on the previous discovery. So, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, whether it's Danny Fingeroth or Ari Kaplan, Jules Pfeiffer. But so, yes, there are ancient versions of heroic figures and deities or quasi-deities that are attributed to Samson, not Samson per se. And Samson, by the way, is believed to have informed the character of Hercules, very much so. And then in later depictions, Renaissance depictions, the visual of Hercules informed Samson back. So it all comes back into this kind of stew. In the Bible, you mentioned Samson's hair. The Bible describes Samson's hair not as this beautiful mane, but rather 7 cornrows. He had 7 cornrows ending in braids. 7 being the typological number of God, the manifestation of God in the Bible. And there are many examples of this. The easiest being that the world was created in 7 days, right? And you're right that he had a very strong connection to the sun. His very name in Hebrew, Samson, is Shimshon, which if you break down into the roots, Hebrew is a root and then prefix suffix language, a little bit like German, but a lot of classical languages are. It's Shemesh On, which basically means might of the sun. It's right there in the name. And who is his kryptonite? If we're running with the metaphor, Delilah, right? He is willfully blinded by his love or lust for Delilah, and therefore literally blinded. There's this beautiful literary, poetic angle to it. And what is Delilah in Hebrew? Lila is night. Dalid in a system before numerals, right? When it was alphanumerical, Dalid is 4. In which night does she finally discover his secret and take away his powers? The 4th night. Her name literally is foreshadowing her role in the story. So there's a lot of these beautiful parallels. I'm not saying Jerry Siegel was consciously aware of all of them, but this is a guy who grew up in a Yiddish-speaking household, went to Hebrew school, went to synagogue. His mother was very active in Jewish charities and organizations. He was most certainly aware of these stories and that he named his character God and gave him all these, and he acknowledged some of these again.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe. For a lot of people who are following your work and the Jewish backstory of Superman, we finally have a Superman played by a Jewish actor. What do you want to say about that?
I actually wrote a piece for CNN about why Cornsweat's Jewish background is important and what ways it's important. And as you might expect, I got an awful lot of emails about it going both directions, but that's always a good thing. Is it important to the movie? Of course not, but it does resonate. And the fact that it got covered not just across the Jewish press, but in Rolling Stone and in Inverse and in CNN shows that, there is a certain importance. It's not clear how he defines himself. He definitely defines himself as Jewish as well. But he's Jewish on his father's side. The family has strong generational ties to a Reform shul, the first Reform synagogue in New Orleans. David is secular, not really practicing, but when he got married in Philadelphia to a Catholic woman, the ceremony was an interfaith ceremony co-officiated by his family's rabbi who flew in from New Orleans. Cornsweat has spoken at a Jewish Pride event. However, he's never answered the straightforward question of how he defines himself. And when he has been asked in some interviews recently about his Jewish background, he changed the subject very adroitly. So I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't know what he's comfortable with. Nonetheless, he is of a Jewish background, which has struck a chord, and it is a nice full circle in a way.
Beyond the comic book manifestations of Superman, there have been Jewish moments, like in Superman 2, I'm remembering, with the Niagara Falls scene. Superman sweeps down and saves that boy, and the nice little Jewish lady says, but there are little hints here and there of Superman's Jewishness. So I don't know if in your mind that was to continue this idea that Superman was Jewish or something else.
Superman is a nice Jewish boy, sort of a known secret in the industry since at least 1965, where Jules Feiffer writes about it in the introduction to his book, the great comic book Heroes. And even though it went under the radar, that famous Kill Bill 2 speech where Bill talks about how Superman is really Superman.
Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent.
That is almost verbatim taken from that introduction, which I don't think is an act of plagiarism. And nobody caught on to this, by the way. Nobody ever wrote about it. I don't think that's an act of plagiarism. I think it's a wink, wink at anybody who found it. And there are other hints. If you remember Christopher Reeve, the first movie, Superman, right? He's 18, his father dies, he hears the crystal, and he goes on this walkabout across the North Pole. And he throws a crystal, and it creates a fortress of solitude. He walks in, and then the hologram of his father in the shape of this bright apparition is revealed to him. And that's something that first appears in the movie. It's not in the comics, but it got folded into the comics following because it's such a powerful kind of, dramatic element. That's the story of Moses crossing the desert of Midian and coming across the burning bush. It's beat to beat the same. It's thematically the same. One is fire, one is ice, but it's the same thing. And the famous speech that he gives them, they can be a great people, they wish to be, definitely has strong Christ parallels. I give them you, my only son. But if you look at that and the speech that the burning bush, the angel of the Lord in the burning bush gives Moses, they are also almost verbatim the same speech, same structure, even same pentameter, same rhythm. So that's always been there. And we can go to examples that are a lot more explicit in the comics from the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's always been there.
40-14!
Going into the movie, personally, I was hoping for more because I read all about how there was a lot of heart in the film and how it was different than other superhero movies. But ultimately, one of the problems that I had with the plot, strangely enough, or the movie, I should say, is that Superman isn't really the center of the film. He's there, but there's so much else going on. There's about 9 or 10 plots, very little story to hold it all together. And unlike a lot of people, I can't remember or a memorable scene with Superman. Superman himself seems to be kind of submerged in this James Gunn, TikTok strung together kind of attention deficit disorder film. I don't know if you felt the same way. It's just I've been trying over the past few days to remember scenes involving Superman in the movie that isn't him just fighting or getting beat up. Um, where is that heart? Where did I miss?
I think the movie does have heart. I think a lot of what you said is true. I just think Superman is the center of the film, but the film is crowded. So Superman is still the center, but there's a lot around him to obfuscate that. I think the movie's too crowded with too many characters. Many of them don't contribute much, if anything. Um, the Daily Planet staff gets short shrift, I think. Mr. Terrific, without spoiling, is way too much in the film, gets way too much screen time, way too much to do. I also admit I hate that character. I think it's a fake, flat, meaningless character. And I almost say that Eddie Gathegi, whether it's written for him that way or he plays it that way, he does with that character as much as you can. He gives him a bit more of a sort of attitude. The comic guy is sort of just looks constipated all the time, but I can't stand that character anyway, and thought he just took away and did way too many things that should have been given to Superman to do. But yes, the movie is overcrowded. Superman does get lost occasionally. There are entire minutes on end where he's off the chessboard, but he's still the center of the film. I agree that the plot is nonsense. It's just a stupid plot, meaningless, right? But to the movie's defense, it's a very lighthearted, not self-serious, silly, over-the-top sci-fi. Comic book fans would know this is Silver Age, very campy, self-embracing nonsense movie. And if you grate on that, then you're not gonna like it. If you need your Superman kind of, has it needs to have some sort of grit and gravitas to have verisimilitude. It's not gonna. But within that context of being silly and having complete nonsensical plot, I thought it was fun, perfectly fine, frothy summer popcorn movie. I do think the Superman himself does have heart. I think it's kind of cheerful and exuberant. Um, and I will say that what carries that movie, I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Now, I would give it a much lower grade as a movie, but what carries it up are the three leads. Nicholas Hoult is Lex Luthor. David Cornsweet is Superman. He's my favorite Cornsweet since he's my favorite Cornsweet since Christopher Reeve, by a margin. But nonetheless, I just look at him. It's a version of Superman, but it's Superman I recognize. Henry Cavill and Superman in Man of Steel, for example, I always say is actually a really good movie. It's just not a good Superman movie. That's a distinction. That character is not who I recognize as Superman. But particularly Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane. She may be my favorite Lois ever. She steals every scene. She's fantastic. So it's the leads that really are perfectly cast and carry the movie.
I actually like the Silver Age Superman. What I think I was reacting to is more of the tech age Superman, where the whole movie revolves around like this ridiculous tech stuff, both with Mr. Terrific, as you're saying, which I agree is like the most annoying kind of superhero, the one who just sort of, punches some buttons and wonderful things happen. And then Luthor, too, is like, I did appreciate that he was Elon Musk, basically, and sort of exposing the evils of that kind of a megalomaniac. But again, like tech versus, the son of Krypton.
The planet Krypton.
We'll say. I don't know. That's not very satisfying to me. And also, like, the end of the movie where it's revealed, spoiler, that the guy who's been fighting Ultraman, which of course I associate with another Ultraman, but that's a whole other story, is basically Bizarro, or, a clone gone awry or whatever of Superman. That's the plot of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, isn't it?
Sort of, kind of. I think, it's very legitimate to like or not like that reveal. But I will say that Gunn did something clever in that Ultraman's costume is very clearly, to me, deliberately partly based on the first appearance costume of Doomsday from the comics. The mask is very similar. So it's like throwing you off, which is something they also did in Superman and Lois, by the way. Ultraman is not a Superman clone, but he is Superman, the evil Superman of an alternate dimension. So he falls in that kind of pastiche kind of, bracket. So that didn't bother me that much. So he's sort of Bizarro, sort of Ultraman. He's evil Superman clone who Superman fights. I think it was a perfectly fine reveal. I think it was superficial. Um, why would Luthor have that technology and then just not just make an army of that? Why bother with all the suits for all his henchmen? Just create a if you have the genetic code, you just go produce and you can program them. Just go nuts. Same with the engineer. If you can do that to one person, why not do it to 100? Why? So, but those are relatively nitpicky stuff. Gunn made a roller coaster ride, and he went for as many loops and trick drops as he could in one movie, rather than give you a straight line of track where you can appreciate the view.
I agree, and I think that's why I didn't like it. And by the way, again, why I don't really care for contemporary superhero movies in general.
I still found heart in it, particularly the chemistry between Brosnahan and Cornsworth. And chemistry is like a cliche. People talk about it, usually means nothing, but there really were sparks between them in every scene. The thing to remember is Lois Lane shows up the same time that Superman shows up in June 1938's Action Comics #1. And the Clark Kent, Superman, Lois Lane triangle was never not a part of the mythology. So Lois Lane is part of Superman, the mythology, the brand, as much as Clark Kent and Superman himself are. So in this movie, they kind of made her own hero, non-superpowered, investigative. She's the one that defeats, well, that's a spoiler. She helps a lot and saves the day in her own way. And as you pointed out, she does a lot of that, not by Superman's side, but by doing her own thing, which could have been kind of twined a little bit better. I agree with that, yeah.
That's another theme is, the heroism of journalists and, the importance of journalism in taking down corrupt, officials and such. I'll confess I'm not really steeped in Superman as much as the two of you are, but I kind of appreciated his depiction because I always thought of Superman as a bit of a kind of cheeseball, corny character.
He's corny and he's earnest and he owns it. And, we need that. We need that right now. And I like that. So, you said about Lois Lane and journalism and that kind of stuff. So I've been joking. I've been telling people, listen, an alien from a different planet who happens to look like a human white hunk, sure, no problem. He puts on glasses, combs his hair, changes tone, nobody recognizes him, sure. He can fly, no problem. I'll buy all of that, right? But he works at a financially viable print newspaper, and the journalists there are all impartial, objective professionals. No, that's way too much of a stretch.
That's a really great point. And actually, the juxtaposition of that kind of old, Daily Planet and all the shit that Luthor was doing with all the gadgets and gizmos, it did speak to like two alternative worlds existing at the same time or not really existing well together. By the way, my favorite iteration of Superman, just to put on the record, is the 1940s radio show. So, I mean, and there were a lot of great things on that, like the Superman versus the Clan of the Fiery Cross, that multi-part story that was a takedown of the KKK and all that stuff. But again, the Superman on that show is really pure and honest, and the sponsor was Kellogg's Pep cereal, the Sunshine cereal. So that's the Superman that I actually know, because I hadn't seen all the corruptions in the DCU. So none of that was like surprising to me to see like a pure, good-hearted Superman. That's the only Superman that I know. Maybe because I don't watch a lot of superhero movies, I wasn't longing for the redemption of the character in the same way as other audience members, so it didn't affect me the same way.
It's interesting that you bring up the radio series for two reasons. One is the depiction of the character in it is very almost seamless, almost to the Fleischer cartoon serial of the 40s, and even voiced by the same guy, Bud Collyer. So it was just interesting that you mentioned the radio, but not the cartoon series, because the depiction of the character is almost the same. Regarding the fan of the clan of the Fiery Cross, for those watching or listening who don't know, there was a multi-part um, storyline where he fights what was the KKK in everything but name. Um, and he of course saves an Asian family from, and again, this is the context, think of the 1940s and all that. And it was adapted into a wonderful comic book by Jinlun Yang, and purportedly an FBI undercover informant was feeding the producers of the show real KKK information, like passwords and ceremonies and everything, to embarrass them. The show didn't show them as a menace, but as a bunch of buffoons in bed sheets, right? So in Freakonomics, the book claims that it actually led to a downturn in enlistment for the KKK in the South, because so many kids listened to the series and then decided this is a joke. But the Jewish connection is that this is actually a Jewish conspiracy, quote unquote. The show was produced by Robert Maxwell, Jewish, and he was in cahoots with the Anti-Defamation League, which behind the scenes, along with an association of rabbis and cultural anthropologists and priests as well, came up with storylines that promoted coexistence and pluralism and anti-racism and anti-fascism. And in fact, they also had another storyline that's less known, where Superman saves an interfaith community center and saves the rabbi from being killed. So there's a strong Jewish connection to the radio series as well.
So I know a scene that Jonathan and I both really liked it was when he, saved a squirrel. That was kind of, I felt like that was a little bit of fan service, Also, I thought Crypto was also kind of fan service. I mean, the first time I saw Crypto, the dog, he just reminded me of my dog, He's white and curly and, unruly as well. Like, Superman's injured and the first thing he does is jump on his chest. And I thought, yeah, that's my dog. So yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering if there's anything to say about Superman, the animal lover.
I have to admit, I'm not a fan of Crypto in this movie or in principle. I like him out of canon. I don't like these in the comics. Make an uncanonical, kiddie-friendly The Adventures of Superboy and Crypto, where a 10-year-old, 12-year-old Superboy flies around on misadventures with his pet dog, perfect for, little kids. Leave him alone. In general, though, all the Supergirl, it's too much. It waters down the concept. Superman should really be, in my opinion, the sole survivor of a catastrophe, the last son of Krypton, with the exception of the three Phantom Zone criminals, which makes this tragedy even deeper, because here you have other survivors, but they're the worst people to have survived. Which in my book I say is this was all developed in the comics post-Holocaust in the 50s. So there's that metaphor of, so many good people died and so many bad people. Sometimes that's what got you through, right? So there's some metaphor there. But the Jewish connection to Crypto is that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have very different views on dogs. And I thought that was very interesting. Not really related to Crypto directly, but that's their hook. In Islam, dogs are inferior. You curse somebody by saying a dog. If you're a devout Muslim, you're not allowed to have a dog in your home. Infidels are supposed to be reincarnated as pigs and dogs and monkeys and whatnot. So it's very much a lower animal. Christianity is very neutral. Medieval Christianity has strong opinions of certain animals that it associates with the devil, right? Rats and spiders and ravens, cats, but nothing about dogs. Very neutral, nothing in there. Judaism holds dogs in a high regard as man's best friend and an animal that can't help but be good and be loyal and be joyful. When Moses sends his spies into Canaan, Israel, to come back, his right-hand man is Caleb ben Yefuneh. Caleb means dog, right? And the Talmud talks about how this is, the man is named Caleb. It's sort of like a Native American naming. It's after your qualities, because he's, loyal and always on his side. And Caleb breaks down, how we spoke about Hebrew being a root and a suffix. Caleb breaks down to kol lev, full of heart.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the biblical narrative itself has negative depictions of dogs too, but that's notwithstanding, that's part of that world that dogs were scavengers and guard dogs and so forth. The squirrel thing that Joey was mentioning, I think that has a lot to do with James Gunn being an animal rights person. I think he was the 2023 PETA Man of the Year, something like that. So I did appreciate that element. To me, that was actually the best scene in the movie, when he saved the squirrel. It said a lot about him, and actually, squirrels are my favorite animals.
Yeah, the squirrel scene, and I don't think we're spoiling too much for viewers and listeners. He stops to save a squirrel, and he doesn't do it at the expense of people. People are not dying off screen because he took the time to save a squirrel, and it's gonna rub some people the wrong way as sort of cloyingly sentimental, this kind of forced, like, oh, he saved a CGI squirrel. And some people, like you, Jonathan, are gonna say, oh, okay, that's a nice Superman moment that he took the time and he cares. Um, I got a chuckle out of it. I didn't feel strongly either way, but I got a chuckle out of it.
So it also fleshes out his character a little bit. It shows the extremes he'll go to protect every life form. And, he just doesn't like anybody getting hurt, including animals, which I think is kind of wonderful as well.
Yeah, and as much as I didn't really care for the Justice Gang, I was pleased to see that Guy Gardner has his Mo Howard haircut intact. That was nice.
Nathan Fillion surprised me for the better. I didn't think the character was necessary or that he was good casting, and he proved me wrong. So good for him.
Well, thank you so much, Roy, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.